All right, this is Chapter 18, Section 2, the Spanish-American War. And in our previous lesson, if you remember, we talked about how America was expanding its borders, specifically to Alaska and Hawaii. All right, so the main idea of this lesson: in 1898, the United States went to war to help Cuba win its independence from Spain. Now, why does this matter? U.S. involvement in Latin America and Asia increased greatly as a result of the war and continues today. All right, so Cubans rebel against Spain. Spain was one of the most powerful colonial nations on the earth. And by the end of the 19th century, Spain had lost most of its colonies, and it retained only the Philippines, an island off of Guam in the Pacific, and a few outposts in Africa and the Caribbean island of Cuba and Puerto Rico in the Americas. So here's the Philippines, Guam. Here's some territories that are owned in Africa. This is Western Sahara and Puerto Rico and Cuba. All right, the United States long held an interest in Cuba, which lies only 90 miles south of Florida. And in 1854, diplomats recommended to President Franklin Pierce that the United States, they wanted him to buy Cuba from Spain. And the Spanish responded by saying that they would rather see Cuba sink into the ocean. Here's President Franklin Pierce. All right, so the Cubans rebelled against the Spanish in 1868 and in 1878. And the Cuban revolt against Spain was not successful, but in 1886, the Cuban people did force Spain to abolish slavery, which is a good thing. After the emancipation of Cuba's slaves, American capitalists began investing millions of dollars into large sugarcane plantations on the island. So I think I just went over two of the questions that you're going to have to answer at the end of this PowerPoint presentation. What did Americans invest large amounts of money in Cuba? Why? Okay, what did? Maybe that should be why. Why did Americans begin to invest large amounts of money into Cuba? Well, here you go. Sugar cane plantations. Number one is B. Sugar cane plantations. Okay, moving on. All right, the Second War of Independence. An anti-Spanish attitude in Cuba soon erupted into a second war for independence. Jose Martini, a Cuban poet and journalist in exile in New York, launched the revolution in 1895. He organized the Cuban resistance against Spain using active guerrilla campaigning. All right, so guerrilla warfare is a hit-and-run tactic. And deliberately destroying property, especially American-owned sugar mills and plantations. He also provoked the United States intervention to help the rebels achieve freedom in Cuba. So this guy's a journalist in New York City, and he's publishing all this stuff for Americans to help intervene with the rebel cause to free Cuba. So the public opinion was that the United States was split. Some businesses wanted the government to support Spain in order to protect their investments, and other Americans were enthusiastic about the rebel cause due to the similarity of the American Revolution. And in 1896, Spain responded to the Cuban revolt by sending General Valero Wellheim. I can't say this guy's name. It's very hard to pronounce it. So they sent this dude to Cuba to restore order. And this general is going to want to try to crush the rebellion by herding the entire population of central and western Cuba into barbed wire concentration camps. So this is going to be one of the first times you're going to see concentration camps. So he's going to try to herd the population of Cuba into these concentration camps. And there was an estimate of 300,000 Cubans filled these camps where thousands died from hunger and disease. Not a good idea. Not a good idea by Spain to send this guy in. All right, so this general's actions fueled a war over newspaper circulation that had developed between American newspaper tycoons William Randolph Hearst and Joseph Pilsner. And this type of journalism, what is going to come out of this is its sensational style of writing, what exaggerates the truth. It's going to be known as yellow journalism. Butcher, look, this the Cuban mother, butcher. So it's very like to the point, to the chase, and you see this a lot nowadays with our media. It's very, it's over exaggerated. It's a lot of like broad titles, something that's going to intrigue the reader. So I think that answers number question 2. What type of journalism exaggerates the news to lure and enrage readers? What is it known as? It's known as yellow journalism. So number 1 is B, and number 2 is B. All right, so when President William McKinley took office in 1897, demands for American intervention in Cuba were on the rise, but he preferred to avoid the war with Spain, and he tried diplomatic means to resolve the crisis. And in early 1898, so the next year, President McKinley had ordered the USS Maine in Cuba to bring home American citizens in danger from fighting and to protect American property. So on February 15th, 1898, the ship blew up in the harbor of Havana, and more than 260 men were killed. So on April 20th, 420, 1898, the United States declared war on Spain. And the slogan's going to be, "Remember the Maine." So the war in the Philippines. The Spanish thought that the Americans would invade Cuba. So the first battle of the war took place in a Spanish colony on the other side of the world, in the Philippine Islands. So that's this area right here. Here we are in New Jersey. Here's the Philippine Islands. Commodore George Dewey gave the command to open fire on the Spanish fleet in Manila, in the Philippine capital. Within hours, Dewey's men had destroyed every Spanish ship there. So that's pretty crazy. We United States dominated that battle. Dewey had the support of the Filipinos, who, like the Cubans, also wanted freedom from Spain. The Filipinos joined the rebellion, and in August 1898, Spanish troops in Manila, I'm not sure if I'm saying that correctly, surrendered to the United States. So here's Commodore George Dewey, and this is a Spanish cruiser that was lost in the battle. 25 men were killed on it, and 80 were wounded. So here we are, destroying their ships, American ships, destroying the Spanish ships. Here's some American sailors. It's pretty cool that they got pictures from back then. All right, the war in the Caribbean. In the Caribbean, hostilities began with a naval blockade of Cuba. So we're going to send our American ships to surround the ports of Cuba, and that's going to be known as a blockade. So ships can't go in and out. It's going to stop trade as well. So Dewey's victory had demonstrated the superiority of the United States and its naval forces. 125 Americans had volunteered to fight, and the new soldiers were sent to training camps that lacked adequate supplies and effective leaders. There was not enough modern guns to go around, and the troops were outfitted with heavy woolen uniforms, unsustainable for Cuba's tropical climate. So these guys are in some unequipped, very heavy jackets for this tropical climate. It's not these coats and uniforms that they're wearing. It's going to be hard to stay hydrated wearing those things. All right, the Rough Riders. American forces landed in Cuba in June 1898 and began to converge on the port city of Santiago. And this is an army of 17,000, and this included the regular army, which was like 4 African American regiments, and also the Rough Riders. And these guys were volunteer cavalry under the command of Theodore Roosevelt. And here's Theodore Roosevelt right here. He would later become the president of the United States. So the most famous land battle took place in Cuba in July 1st, 1898. And the battle featured a dramatic uphill charge by the Rough Riders and 2 African American regiments. Roosevelt and his units played a major role in this victory. And then the U.S. newspapers declared him the hero of San Juan Hill. So here we go with the Americans charging up the hill against the Spanish troops. And this was going to be in Cuba, San Juan Hill, the Battle of San Juan Hill. 2 days later, the Spanish fleet tried to escape the American blockade. The naval battle followed along the Cuban coast and ended in the destruction of the Spanish fleet. So the Spanish fleet was going to be destroyed. The American blockade worked. On the heels of victory, American troops invaded Puerto Rico next on July 25th. And the United States and Spain signed a ceasefire agreement on August 12th, 1898, ending the war. So this was a very quick little war. The actual fighting of the war only lasted 15 weeks, and on December 10th, 1898, the United States and Spain met in Paris to agree on a treaty. We're always meeting in Paris to discuss treaties for some reason. At the peace talks, Spain freed Cuba and turned over the island of Guam and Puerto Rico in the West Indies to the United States. So this is how America is going to obtain Puerto Rico and Guam too. We still own those islands as territories in America. Spain also sold the Philippines to the United States. So the Philippines was also a territory in the United States, but we were going to give that back to the Filipinos after World War II for $20 million. Some felt that the treaty violated the Declaration of Independence by denying self-government to the newly acquired territories. African Americans argue that the United States should settle race-related issues at home before taking social problems elsewhere. And Americans feared that Filipino immigrants would compete for American jobs. So there was a lot of controversy with this at the Treaty of Paris. All right, so here's what I was talking about. On February 6th, 1899, annexation question was settled. The United States now had an empire that included Guam, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines. So here's mainland America, and here's the other territories that we are going to acquire after this war. So here's your questions. Let's see if I didn't answer any. Okay, how many people were killed on board the USS Maine when it blew up in the Havana Harbor on February 15th, 1898? That's going to be 260 men. When did the U.S. declare war on Spain? When did it declare war on Spain? Let's see. Oh, April 20th, 420. 1898. And April 20th, 1898, what country did Spain sell the U.S. for $2 million? Let's see here. $2 million. 20 million? $20 million. I believe. Okay, here we go. Okay, that actually should be December 10th copy. All right, so Spain sold the Philippines for $20 million. What country did Spain sell the U.S. for $20 million on December 10th? There you go, just a little quick at it. Okay, so number 5 is going to be the Philippines. So, Answer the following questions and email them back to me at shauser@pway.org. You got 5 questions. Here they are. Just email them back to me. All right. Peace.